Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name's Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it's that time again. It is Stephen Friday. Folks, it's amazing. It's like how time flies. 15 episodes with Steve Staggs. Why did we even start this whole thing? We started it because I literally went to a meetup for Texan Token in Dallas, and Carter brought his friend. And when I met his friend and I shook his hand and learned that he played baseball at the big leagues, I heard his voice, and the Lord said to me, "Hey, pay attention to this guy." And I just started talking and developing a relationship and having phone calls that, I thought were going to be 15 minutes and ended up being 3 hours. And it's really cool to have a friend, right? God, just how many friends do you have? And how rare is it that someone, that generationally, right? Steve and I are not from the same generation, even though I might look like I'm I'm a senior. He's a mentor and a friend. And what has been amazing about this is to see somebody that's so desirous and committed to and disciplined to talking with Jesus. What an amazing thing, right? And then encouraging me to do the same. Like, don't listen to me. Ask him yourself, man. And you know what's amazing about people? God uses people to help remind you, hey, man, the basics, get back to the basics. I'm here. And that's the thing that is so encouraging to me. So what are we doing? We're inviting you into our conversation. That's what we're doing. And you know what? I think we're going to do the Vulcan mind meld today between crypto and Jesus. It's funny is on my Twitter feed, I looked at trending, when you pop up trending, and there were two things. It said, Jesus is alive. That was a hashtag, and it was trending. And then Richard Hart was right. And they were right next to each other. And I literally snapped it. I'm like, my worlds, they're converging. And what was funny about it was Richard Hart totally ratioed Jesus. I'm like, come on, man. But how cool was that? And so just a fun time. I want to give a shout out to Maddie Allen, who's doing 48-hour stream. I was just on the stream. Rags kicked things off. I got to come in with KG and Cabana Crypto, and it was awesome to talk about. But what an interesting time, because most people that are listening to this or will listen to this may be in this crypto ecosystem that we're in. And it's kind of weird, right? You're like, Crypto RB, why are you talking about Jesus, man? Well, you know what I think is incredible is if you want to know about something, it reminds me of the Tommy Boy, right? He goes, you're going to stick your head up the backside of a steer, or are you going to take the butcher's word for it, right? So we're going to get to the inside of how is this thing made? What is this all about? How's it structured? How does it work? And what does it mean? And so that's really what I'm curious about. So welcome back, folks. Let's bring in the man of the day here. It's so great to have my buddy Steve Staggs. What's up, Steve?
Hey, how you doing, man?
You gonna take the butcher's word for it?
Well, I think that's the preferred approach.
I think so too. It's so good to see you, and it's so good to have these conversations. We're in episode 15, if you can believe it, right? Like 2 hours a piece, at least 15 episodes, 30 hours. It's been awesome. And I think about it, if we've spent this much time actually on the stream, how much time we spent outside of this is unbelievable. And I'm so thankful that you're willing to share this time and and invest in me. Honestly, I really appreciate it a lot.
Well, it's my pleasure. The Lord had others invest in me, and so just thrilled to be able to pass along.
Yeah, and I think that's a lesson for all of us too, is that, you kind of gave me a hard time for this statement. I'd say we're just one beggar helping another beggar find food. And obviously there's some, fundamental things about that that are challenging, but this idea that you've seen and tasted that the Lord is good.
Yeah.
And you're like, I just want you to know and to be encouraged. And so let me ask you about this, right? Here is this main purpose of what we're doing here. And the thing that I've often said that is just the lowest common denominator of every conversation we ever have, it's Jesus is alive and he speaks. Okay.
Yeah.
So this idea that's how I distill it down. I'm like, you are constantly reminding me that he is alive and he speaks. And this idea of, well, what does it mean to have ears to hear him speak? And what is a relationship with the creator of the, galaxy, the universe? You said something earlier yesterday, and I always want to start out with this. And you talked about how you develop relationships with any friend. Can you talk to us about your experience since way back of cultivating this relationship with Jesus?
Well, yeah, would enjoy that. As I mentioned in the earlier streams, and you've made references to it a couple of times about, I've always had this interest in, in Jesus. Who are you? From the time the pastor said, anybody out there want to get to know Jesus? And man, I'm in. Let's do that. And then had what I would call a very unique, profound experience when I was about 11 or 12. Then another one when I was like 18. And in each of these, what was interesting is Jesus was letting me know that he was the real deal. And without speaking a word, without making a statement, just by the mere presence, him positioning himself in my sphere and letting me know simply by his presence that he was the real deal. Now, I was raised in church for the majority of my youth, going into high school and stuff. So I was very familiar with Bible teaching, very familiar with the Bible. I had from a very early age, I had a grasp and could grasp the concepts. I think I mentioned that, I didn't want to be with I didn't want to be in the church part for the kids. I wanted to be there with the adults listening to the preacher preach stuff, because I was interested and I could grasp it. So these experiences, I never heard anybody talk about.
Yeah.
I would hear words like anointing, things of that nature. I would hear things like, wow, the Lord showed me. I would hear that kind of description, but I never heard anybody say, wow, the Lord came into my room and just sat with me. And it blew my mind. He didn't say a word, and yet in saying nothing, he was communicating everything. So now fast forward, I was never one of those, as I mentioned in a previous stream, of, rejecting God or deciding I was going to go my way or any of that stuff. I just took him everywhere with me. So if he was uninformed about the certain ways of the world, by the time he and I got through hanging, he was no longer uninformed. He was perfectly informed about, what happens down here. And I never once, not one time, did I ever hear him utter a displeasure or project any kind of condemnation. And I'm using that term because it means something to a lot of folks, which was very different than my experience in the church and sitting in front of the preachers and the teachers and the Sunday school. So it was very, very different, man. If you did those boo-boos, man, watch out, because God's coming after you. You know, the whole hate sin kind of concept.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't my experience. And it wasn't an approval. Don't get me wrong there. It wasn't that he was approving. It's just that he was not condemning. It was as if he was waiting. Now, looking back, it was as if he was waiting for the right time for me to be able to hear. And so in one particular occasion, I've written about it in the 60s white paper. You know, I was sitting on a mountaintop on a mescaline trip, and of all things, and Jesus said, and this is the way he does things, at least in my experience. Steve, why is it that you are trying so hard to destroy the wonderful mind that I've given you? And it was just a question. There was nothing weird in it. There was no condemnation. There was no disapproval. It was as if somebody was looking at another person doing something crazy, and they're confounded why that person would do such a stupid thing without projecting stupidity.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm kind of giving you some background. So again, fast forward even later, and then I heard the Lord extend an invitation to go and work with him. And Matt, I was not interested in that kind of thing at that time. So what I'm communicating are these little different ways that he communicates, sometimes with words and language, sometimes just with feelings, sometimes through just his presence, but in every instance, it's a form of him communicating. And it was very powerful in the way that it came to me. And then one day he just said, "Okay, it's time to take this to the next level. Are you interested, Steve?" And yeah, and then when I look back and I thought, wow, every single thing that happened was because I was interested. You know, it wasn't because I had any knowledge. It wasn't because I was pursuing some great ambition. It wasn't because I thought, oh, gee whiz, I want to be this great man of God or preacher or any of that kind of stuff that was common inside the church world that I was a part of. As a matter of fact, at one time I actually wanted and thought I was being called to the ministry, as the vocabulary exists in that world. And the Lord just made it clear, nope, that's not what I'm asking you to do. That's not it. And I was confused by it, because in my training, that's how you really served God.
Yeah.
If you were in business, you served him by tithing and being a good Sunday school teacher or a good deacon or elder or something like that. That's how you served him there, is primarily with your money and time. But if you really wanted to get serious, you then went into the ministry.
Yeah.
You know, missionary, you know, Bible teacher, pastor. And I found that it was entirely different. That what he was introducing me to was a way of living with him moment by moment without any break. Like breathing. We don't take a break in breathing. If we do, we choke and it's called sleep apnea if we do it at night. If we do it during the day, it's called suffocation. See? So it becomes this unbroken experience of living with him in the very moment of moments.
Yeah.
And that was an entirely different experience. And then what he did is he would take me through very, very practical processes, what we would call, when I use the word practical, I mean something that can be implemented in a physical form. It's all practical. But in this context, it's how you implement it in a physical form. And so I remember him starting with the way he introduced it is a guy would come to me that I worked with, was a part of a company that I formed early on out of my baseball career, and the guy would come to me and give me a verse, and he'd say, "The Lord impressed me to give you this verse." And by golly, that verse spoke exactly to where I was at that particular moment. And so I started asking him, how did that happen? How did that, well, I don't know. I just, was reading the Bible today, or I was praying, and I was just impressed to give you this verse. And so that was kind of a launching point to where then Jesus said, okay, if you're ready to go to the next level, here's how this works. And then he took me through my own process where for a period, actually an entire summer in 1982, he began with, Steve, you are not to do anything, go anywhere, or engage any activity unless I tell you to do it. The exception is if you have to go to the bathroom, you don't have to ask me, or if your wife asks you to do something, you don't have to check. You just do it. You do what she's asking you to do. Otherwise, you're not given permission to do one thing unless I tell you. Well, Matt, when you're trying to raise a family, when you're trying to pay bills, when you're trying to do stuff, that is a pretty tall order because I had no idea how to do it. So when folks, like on the stream say, well, how do you do this? How does this happen? All I can tell you was that Jesus is the one who made it happen. He was the one who took the reins. And so it began from the very early ages of my life, and he would inject himself. That would be my description of it. He would eject himself into my world and make me understand something that I knew was not coming out of my mind or my experience. And what happened was I began to find out that, oh, that's not coming from me. So where is that coming from? I began to realize that, no, Staggs, you're not wired to think like that. So where is that coming from? God, is that you? Is that coming from you? And it's just that simple of a process. And then along the way, he began to take me into deeper, more complex ways where then I began to, just like we talk about in our previous sessions about little babies, they start practicing feeding back, and talking back, and they can hear a whole lot sooner than they can speak, which is a good thing because it's out of the hearing that they learn to do the speaking. And so for me, that's the process. Very basic, very simple, all based moving into the more complex, all based and centered around this simple thing called being interested.
Wow. Well, and you think about that, the assumption I have is there's no end to this.
No,
there's no bottom, and you can go as deep as you are interested in desire. And one of the things you said right at the beginning will you let me know you are the real deal?
Yeah.
And you know what's neat about this? Our commonality, but you and I have, and I think a lot of people have, is I remember saying, because I'd come through the church and I had been, the Sunday school teacher that said, raise your hand if you're not saved. I mean, they were literally trying to put you in a bag, and like
Yeah.
tag you. And I thought it was hokey. And, I did the things that they said and it had no power. And so I just was like, this is just for weak minded people. And it wasn't until I literally asked them, I was like, if I'm gonna do this with you, like you're gonna have to show me that you have real power. And when you say, "Will you let me know that you're the real deal?" I think that's one of these amazing things is that it seems like every time I've ever asked for, and I don't mean a sign, right? I don't mean a sign, but that I've been interested or needed a reminder that he's near and close. I've always received that, and I think that there's it's like you become more and more and more sensitive. And you said it kind of becomes like breathing,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and so I'm enamored with that. And I love this thing that, there's a mystery to it as well, right? There's an interesting mystery. Like, why did that man give you those Bible verses?
Yeah.
And but it's funny. So when you said that, I literally looked down at my phone and this is what I saw. Proverbs 19:21. There are many devices in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. And how interesting is it?
Yeah.
Just so relevant right now. It's
Yeah.
like there are many devices in my heart. Yeah, I've got a lot of different plans, going my own way and doing my own thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, hold on a second. The counsel. So there's so much. And I even told you this week, it feels like when I was reading things and seeing things, for those who have ears to hear,
Yeah.
and I was reflecting on the fact that, you know how many times that's said?
Yeah.
This idea that, hey, do you have ears? Faith comes through hearing, all these kind of things that you kind of probably remember. But there's something really powerful, this idea that you talked about past, present, and future. In the moment, what is it like to actually just be with him? And you said to me, and I've been experiencing this, you said, you're enamored with the power of God. But I see that what he's doing is talking to you about the authority.
Yeah.
And will you tell us the difference between power and authority in that context? You're like, hey, yeah, you're seeing there's power here, but
Yeah.
power isn't how he acts. And we've talked about reaction and in proaction and all that. But can you kind of define those different things? What do you mean the difference between power and authority?
Yeah. By the way, that's a really fun discussion when you get into the dynamics of it. First of all, authority is permission to use power.
Okay.
So it is a delegated element. So all authority, for example, all authority was given to Jesus. Okay, so he has permission to use all power. So first thing is, where did that permission come from? And where did the power then likewise come from? And then what is the purpose for the power? So all things reside in and come out from the Father, all things. So he possesses all authority, all power, all capability. That's why he is the Father, because it comes out from him. And so authority is delegated. The Father delegated all authority to Jesus, the Son, in that particular instance. And that authority then gives permission to utilize power in a manner that accomplishes the purpose for giving the authority. Okay, so the way it would look like is, okay, what is the purpose for authority? The purpose for authority is to bless and protect in the kingdom. So when Jesus then delegates a measure of authority to us, it's for the purpose of blessing and protecting whatever it is that he entrusts to us. So then let's use it in the context um, of the family. So Jesus delegates a certain measure of authority to the husband for the purpose of blessing and protecting, and then grants access to and gives permission to access power to make effective that authority. And it happens throughout the entire family structure. So power is the thing that enables the authority to function for the purpose of accomplishing the reason for which the authority was granted.
Okay.
Okay. So authority, power to achieve outcome. Authority to bless and protect, power to exercise and enforce the blessing and protecting.
We don't hear the, I always am interested in if you could continue the story of the prodigal son, to your point, and you think, we hear the story of before, what he did. I want I want the inheritance, and goes off and does this, right?
Yeah.
But when he comes back, he gets the ring, right? And to me, I'm a big fan of this idea of a signature ring, this idea that at that time, especially when you are a herald of and a carrier of and an ambassador of the father's authority, in this case of the prodigal son, it's for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? There's a purpose. And we don't know the story. What did the prodigal son do after he got the ring?
Yeah.
Like what? Because he understood the nature and character of his father.
Yeah.
And what's amazing to me, and this is the thing we've talked about many times, it still blows my mind so much, that the father agreed to finance his destruction.
Yeah.
And isn't that wonderful? That when you said he sits next to you and there's no condemnation, that's love right there, right?
Yeah.
That I would trust and know that you will understand my nature and character when you see the contrast.
Yeah.
And you'll come back to me. And I feel like that's every one of our stories. We come back to him. Why? Do we come back to him so we get the fatted calf? No. In that humility, he thought, I'll just be like one of the servants.
Yeah.
And no, he said, no. I had plans all along for you. I feel that waywardness is my story too.
Yes.
It's like, I just went this way and all that. And I'm like, and to think that, and of course we go even back to the serpent in the garden, right? Like these things were known. Yeah. I created these things so that you would understand my nature and character. Anyway, I just wanted to illustrate that because it's just so profound to me, this idea that you're not given authority without purpose.
Yes. Oh, if we were to go into the whole stewardship, thing that has been inside the church again has been so sterilized. It is a very, very profound component of God's operating system within his creation. And it's absolutely significant, but nobody ever tells us about it. Why? And, the whole purpose for these conversations and others is because we're not talking to the architect. We're talking to somebody else about their interpretation or observation without going to the architect. Now we're back to what you reference all the time in our conversations and relationship. Yeah, we'll talk about stuff, but hey, man, you got to go talk to Jesus about this, because basically all I can do is introduce you. If the things I'm introducing you and others on this stream are of interest to you, wait until you start hanging out with the man who created it.
Yeah. Most people don't feel like he's available. That's the thing that's so amazing to me, is that you've communicated this in the past, but this idea that there are these lookalikes, there are these ones who are deceiving you. And, we go to church and I listen to these things and I hear It's like I almost feel like I hear the same thing over and over again. I don't mean the content, I mean the structure and process.
Yeah.
It's very safe to talk about the historic Jesus, and it's wonderful to talk about this future of heaven. But right here in the present, it's almost as if there are forces and a spirit within the church that is saying, do not touch the living moment by moment Jesus. Because if you do, you realize you are a son of God with authority and you're connected to him and listen to him. That's where the power is manifest. He gives you the authority and it's for a purpose. And I think so many people, there's so much jealousy and all of that. It's like, well, you hear from Jesus. Well, it's really incredible to me because there's so many barriers that have been set up in the way.
Yes.
And what you're saying and what I've experienced, and really over the last 8 months, Steve, with talking to you and all this stuff, I call you. I'm like, Steve, I got a story for you, man. And you're excited about it. You're like, yeah, this is really cool. This is how it works. Folks, wouldn't if there was something that if you had interest in, that you didn't have to hop on one leg at a certain time and do some certain religious practice to achieve, but that your interest and desire, well, that's the story, is that it's so much like crypto, Steve. It's
Yeah.
accessible to anyone who is interested.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is so incredible, is that, I mean, I asked him a real practical way. I'm not believing this stuff unless it has real power. And now to understand authority, well, you wouldn't give me authority like in the story of the talents. It's like, I'll give you a little bit. What'd you do with it?
Yeah.
And you know what's amazing is over time, not saying I keep it all in the same lane all the time, but I feel like this desire to walk with him, he continues to give more things to do and more opportunities. And what's weird about it is, in my mind, what I think of as success or a trajectory or value, I see in like Ray's car broke down and it just happened to be where Brandon was. And I'm like, hold on, he doesn't measure the way we measure.
No, that's right on. And out of that, by the way, not only was it convenient and made a very intolerable situation tolerable, Ray now has this awesome story to talk about.
Yeah.
So it's just not that the deal was done. It's that the deal created this awesome story that is so full of excitement and enthusiasm. When Ray told me, he popped his head in to the screen and said, "Hey man, guess what? Who does that? Who? That is the life that is, when Jesus talked about, I came that your joy would be made full."
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about. I mean, there's this interesting dynamic, Matt. We're told, that we use something like 10% of our brain, okay, or whatever that number is.
Yeah, right? Some smaller portion,
some minute portion, that we use 10% of our brain. Well, if we use 10% of our brain, and let's say the real brainiacs then use 12% of their brain, then what can a 12% brain produce compared to the 100% opportunity?
Yeah.
Only a fraction. Well, gee whiz, why then do we call? No wonder Paul talked about the renewing of the mind.
Yeah.
See, our mind has been atrophied to the point where it's almost useless in comparison to its capacity. Well, guess how that capacity starts being engaged and entered into? With hanging out with the guy who actually built it.
Yeah.
And that is you want to talk about an exhilarating way of life. It is, you're constantly in a state of, wow, I never thought about that. Wow, that is so cool. Whoa, did you just see what happened? And you're calling me all the time talking about it.
And what's so cool? The illustration that I like to use is, it's almost like in my own strength and my own power, I can make like one or two connections, right? And I've said this before, but you know those, in chemistry class in like high school, they'd have those Tinker toys, right? And there were like the balls were like the bonds, right? And they had
Yeah.
different angles to them,
Yeah.
and you stuck you connected them together. And Buckminster Fully, who is the namesake of the Buckyball, which is carbon 60, is like a soccer ball, right? It's
Hmm.
like this amazing formation of carbon. And I was thinking, if those bonds, all those potential ways, every time that I feel like the Lord does something, right? And it's not me putting my hand to it and me doing it,
Yeah.
its resonance affects so many more people and so many more
Yes.
things. It's like it actually resonates,
Yeah.
and you can identify what's of him by how intricate the resonance is and how far and wide it sweeps.
Yeah.
And
The
that's the
reach.
thing, it is so big. It's like you didn't form it yourself. Now you may have been a part of it,
Yeah.
but it's supernatural.
Yes.
And those are the things you're like, well, what's the evidence, right? Well, the evidence is these things, they resonate. And what I think is so neat about what you've talked about for so long is, well, this is the kingdom. This is this idea of how is it supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What would it be like if I took him at his word and I literally said, all right, I'm going to listen to you and only do what you tell me to do? Because every time you do stuff, it resonates throughout my life in so many different ways. And the fruit of it is just abundant.
Yes.
And I think that that's the thing. But you know what's weird, Steve, is it's almost like I have to let go in order to experience that.
Well, that's exactly right, Matt. And what you have to let go of is what you know to begin to learn what you don't know.
Yeah.
See, we know how to we are trained to set our hands to whatever it is that our dream, our vision, our ambition, our goals in life. And, we're trained to do that. Okay, now Staggs, step up and go do it.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I'm trained. God gave you a brain, use it. You don't have to ask him or just go. Oh, but by the way, there are mentors out there that would you be wise to pay attention to along the way. Well, who's the greatest mentor there is? See, how is it that we're not taught that Jesus he's the guy who said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Well, what the heck does that mean if I don't ever tap into that, or I don't take you at your word? Okay,
Right.
good. I'm in. You haven't gone anywhere. What do you see in here? What's happening here that I need to be aware of along the way? One
It's
of the Go ahead.
I just want to say this. I'm delighting in the Lord. This idea of delighting in the Lord. And what's amazing about that is this idea of just being just so joyful about, it strikes me that everyone talks about the word of God. And so many times in my life, the people I run into, the word of the Lord, and how amazing it is just the very term, right? What is the word? But
Yeah.
spoken word.
Yeah.
The word wasn't written first.
No.
The word was spoken first.
Yep.
And it's so neat that you go back to the very beginning. You're like, he spoke it into existence.
Yep.
And you're like, so the real word of God is his spoken word. And I think about so many times you hear this Mount of Transfiguration. This is my son. Listen to him.
Yes.
It didn't say, go read a book he wrote. It says, no, listen to him. So here's the big question. Do you believe that Jesus is alive right now and speaks and is patient as heck to basically let you potentially finance your destruction? But the big question is this: what if we were to take him at his word and listen to him? It seems like authority isn't withheld, but it is withheld until we come to understand the nature and character of who he is. Like, I had to go through this experience before I could get the ring, the son, right? I didn't have the ring when I was out spending all the money and doing all the things. But it wasn't until I understood the father's nature and character that he said, "Ah, son." And I think about my own son that way. It's like,
Yeah.
son, when I tell you to go to bed, that doesn't mean take your iPad underneath your underneath your covers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And what's funny, he was doing something and an email was sent to me and I'm like, "Why is this?" I'm like, "He's under the covers with his iPad."
He's been had.
He was had. He lost some opportunities there. But anyway, I didn't want to interrupt that, but I'm just this idea that delighting in the Lord. Now I look at this and I go, well, then if I'm delighting in you, what do you have for me to do? Tell me what you want me to do. I want to do that.
Yeah, that is exactly right, Matt. And we've also talked that eventually, well, through all of this, your vocabulary begins to change to the point where it's no longer, what do you want me to do? It becomes, okay, Jesus, what do you have in store for us to do today?
Yeah.
There is this real authentic partnership that just is, it's the most fundamental part of how the kingdom was, the whole creation was designed to function. You know, today we call it an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what is the ecosystem about? It's about all kinds of subsystems within the ecosystem that work together to make the macro ecosystem work and function at an extremely high level, at a higher level than any subsystem can operate on its own. Well, that's how the creation was designed. The creation was designed to be integrated, you know, from top to bottom, side to side. It's designed to be integrated and most fundamentally with the one who created it. Yeah. Because he's the one who has the vision for why he created it. You know, now we understand that concept in business. You know,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, there's a vision, there's a mission that we have, there's a purpose for why we're doing this. Everybody needs to get on board so that we can accomplish our vision as a company. So our mission, we look back at the end of the year and we can say we built toward our vision, we accomplished our mission. We have fulfilled the reason for our existence, our purpose. We know how to do it. It's just that we don't know how to do it and never been trained to do it with the Creator to accomplish his purpose for creating and our part in that contribution. We all have a part to play.
Well, so many people have been told and they feel, you know, a lot of people are guilty. A lot of people, you know, I told you I did a crypto seminar with these 17-year-old kids at the school. And two of the kids were like, I asked them, you know, how long do you think you'll live? And these kids like believe that they were just accidentally here. I think there's a lot of people who are believing a lie that there's no purpose for them to be here at all, that it's just accidental. And that's the story we hear in modern culture is billions and billions of years, you just kind of, you know, crawled out of the ooze. I think a big part of this is telling people that it feels like I was told you have to do this series of steps. And what is so refreshing engaging with you is to say, are you interested and are you willing to try him on for size? Ask him and he'll show you. And you go, wow, that's not hard. I mean, it takes a bit of like, okay. And a lot of times the only time I'm willing to do that is when I'm at the end of myself. Everything I've tried is not worked out. And I'm like, well, that sounds like the prodigal son. Everything I've tried hasn't worked out. And here I am, and I need some help. And it's, because that's the thing. That's the amazing thing of this idea of a meeting where you are. If you have interest, that's the simplicity of this, and it's beautiful.
Well, it is, and it opens up the reality of why God created.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. I mean, in today's world, in particular particularly in this country, the spirit of this age, and I'm put it in spiritual context because that's the source of it, is to strip us of our identity. And so what you see happening in the kids that you're talking about, and in the young people, is little by little their identity is being stripped from them. And when you strip identity, you strip meaning and
Yeah.
purpose. And all of a sudden, there is no longer a meaning or a purpose. And now it becomes more procedural in how you work so that you can cooperate and declare as acceptable everyone else's forfeiture of their identity,
Yeah.
as if it's some kind of noble thing. And it's no, that you're not paying attention to what's actually going on here. It's not that somebody is acceptable and somebody isn't acceptable. It's that identity is being stripped. Is anybody pausing to see what happens or consider what happens when identity is lost? See? And so, wow, if we were even thinking about that, maybe we'd step back and take another look at that.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, going back to the prodigal son, um, he discovered his identity through the father's financing of his destruction. See? And so he said, I'm a son, but he saw his sonship in the context of a financial inheritance.
Yeah.
And that financial inheritance gave him the ability, gave him the power to do whatever he wanted with his authority. Now, here is the difference between authority and power in that regard. Power, once exerted, is now expended. Authority is never expended. Okay, so let's take a World War II. We dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. What happened? The bomb was dropped, the power was released, the destruction was accomplished, and that was it. It was spent. That did not eliminate the authority of the government of Japan or of the people of Japan. What it did is it woke them up to how to exercise their authority more prudently. And so it was with the prodigal son. He always possessed the authority as a son. He just was enamored. I'm going to go back to our comment. He was enamored with the power, and that power he exerted in the character of it that he possessed at that time, that immature character, that then ended up in his personal destruction.
Wow.
And in that place, he then said, whoa, I'm still a son, but as a son, I'd be willing to be a slave in my father's house. At that moment, he saw his nature and character in contrast to his father's nature and character.
Yep.
We've talked about that. And he said, whoa, my father is better toward his slaves than the people I'm working for in order to eat pig slop. I'll go back to him now, seeing him for who he is. And when he started his journey back, we've talked about it before, the father came and said, okay, my son, now that you see me for who I am whom you will become. And now here is my ring to prove it.
Wow.
Okay? You and I are one in how we administer this household. Okay? And so the authority remained, it just grew in maturity and understanding of what its role and purpose was. So guess how the son was now going to exercise the full authority of the father. Was he going to exercise it in his previous immature, authority for his own benefit? where he expended the power of the resource and it was spent and gone? Or was he going to start exercising the authority of the Father and the nature and character of the Father
Yep.
with him?
Wow.
There's the journey.
Wow. And it's
there's the journey.
And it's that story appears so many different times. I mean, that's just one example of it. It is so profound and it is so simple all at the same time. And I just, so this kind of makes me think about the times that we currently live in. And, here I do all this crypto stuff, right? And why?
Yeah.
And we see that there's a lot of interesting things happening in our community right now, right? Richard Hart has been sued by the SEC, and we're seeing all these people rally around him. And then, of course, the things that we're dealing with and talking with folks, across the world, there's something, and this is, as we shift gears here, I want to get your thoughts on this. You've said many times, we've forgotten who we are. And of course, you think of those 17-year-old boys who are like, you've taken my identity, so I just, there's no purpose anymore. Well, when you understand that you are a son, and I like what you said, because it's it's subtle. You had the authority, you just did not have the maturity.
Yeah.
And this idea of, okay, what does it mean to be connected to, the vine? What does it mean to be connected to the source? I mean, Jesus said so many times, but made it very clear, I don't do anything except what the Father tells me. Well, I would say, very simply, what he's done is modeled it for us.
Yeah.
Right? No one comes to the Father except through me. I'm the way, the truth, the life. Okay, so I just need to listen to you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So now in my maturity, understanding your nature and character and who you created to me as a son, now it makes sense to me. This whole hierarchy of saying there are those in this world, the spiritual forces are not sons.
No.
And there's so many scenarios in which they want to have what we have.
Yes.
Maybe potentially like a jealousy of, hang on, I do not have this of what you have, this birthright, this sonship. And so I'm going to do everything I can to get that authority. You give me the authority that he already gave you. And it seems like so many things across the world right now are lying to us, just like the serpent, lying to us to get our authority. Because if we give it its authority, it has power over us.
Yes.
So when it comes to this new economic order, and everyone I think that's in crypto that isn't just thinking one Lambo is going, this is really unique, Steve. This seems like the forces and systems of this world of fractional reserve banking and, separating from the gold standard and having, value be kind of floating and, inflation and all of these kind of things are symptoms of something that, and then along comes crypto and you go, this is such an empowering system and force that in a way returns it. It seems like to me, returns it to its rightful owner, meaning choice is restored. Immutable contracts on the blockchain. Hey, you can engage peer-to-peer in this financial system. What do you see happening with, is there a new economic order, and is it one that is aligned with the nature and character of creation, or is that our responsibility? How do you see it?
Well, Jesus is the architect of all things. If we go back to, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. A word is projected out from someone, the one who created the word, who formed the word. So you have right from the beginning, you have the partnership between the one who spoke the word and the word that is now being engaged to accomplish something. And so the word is inseparable from the one who spoke the word. Thus, you have John describing what Jesus described to him, which is the inseparable nature of the Father who spoke the word and the word that is now manifesting to accomplish what the Father spoke. And that word became flesh and dwelt among men.
Wow.
Meaning that the intention was always that we would be an extension of the Father. And as the Father's word is inseparable from him, so we would be inseparable from him as well, because his word then starts taking shape and starts expressing itself both in us and then from being in us through us. So this was all from the beginning. And so everything, it's not like Jesus is reacting so as to create new things to counteract what's going on. It's that he is continuing the creative process that was designed before time began. And then just as different generations and individuals begin to take their place on the planet, they then begin to engage that next creative phase. Okay, so now here we find ourselves in the time new economic order. Well, why are we in the time of new economic order? Because in the progression of God's plan, what is happening is the systems around are beginning to decay at such a rate that, in business terms, you either have continual improvement or step changes, right? You can improve and you can improve and you can improve, but eventually that improvement reaches its ceiling and it's no longer effective for the demands of how things have progressed. So now you got to take a step change.
Yeah.
Well, we're in a time of a step change, economically. Now, there's all kinds of things that we can talk about, from a spiritual dynamic standpoint as to why that's essential and why that's happening. But the point is, you cannot design the step change while being under the authority of the continual improvement design. So in this new economic order that we've talked about, you can't build that operating under the rules of the previous order.
Amen to that.
The previous order is rotten to the core. Its own decay is beginning to become evident. And so in our conversations, what I've said to you, for example, is, Matt, don't feed it.
Right.
See, don't feed that thing because it's decaying right in front of you. The peach is the rot that's in the peach is now becoming visible. And so don't be distracted by people saying, oh, the rottenness is becoming so powerful that it's going to take us over. No, that isn't how rot works. When it is displaying itself, it's not showing you its power. It's doing exactly the opposite. It's showing you the disintegration of its power. See, so don't feed it. Don't empower it any longer. Don't feed it your authority. See, let it be. Start looking at something else because Jesus is building something else.
This is so big. So we're bringing this after 15 episodes back to crypto. So what's so cool about what you said is, and I want to make this like really tangible to those who are always in the chat and always, kind of thinking in terms of this new economic order. They see this promise in crypto, and we've talked about, these are tools, right? Yeah. These are tools, but I really like this peach concept. So what you're saying is, if you were to leave a peach out in the room temperature, eventually it's going to decay. Yeah. And at first you might not see it, but sometimes I've bitten into something that's bad on the inside and went, right? Yeah. So what we're seeing is this current economic system is we're starting to see the cracks and we're starting to see the decay and all that. And what you're saying is we're not trying to shore it up. This is a step change. This isn't an incremental. Let's embrace it and inject it with antibiotics and try to make the system. That's what people are doing. But the beauty of this, and I think this is such a big idea because of what we're going through right now, is that we're seeing people for who they really are. Is that when we see this, like MetaMask and Uniswap have basically said, we're not going to have hex on our platform. Well, they said they were decentralized finance, but they said, nope, we're going to bow to the centralized authorities and we're going to censor you. Well, that is an indication of your centralization. You are not actually committed to decentralization. So you get to see where their allegiances are, right? And I think that there are powers right now within the current economic system that want to do everything they can to prop up a decaying system and hopefully subdue or take over and say this isn't relevant. And that's what we're seeing, is to say, no, don't look over there to that step change, don't look over there to that new thing, don't look over there to that thing that restores choice or restores the nature and character of God, which is, in my opinion, evidenced by abundance.
Yeah.
Look over here. And that's why I was on a stream earlier today, and I said it feels like a battle between good and evil. Is that you have to be principled, you have to be mature, and to understand that, hold on, we're going to animate this tool. Well, how do we animate this tool? In some cases, we defend its purity, and because it is a step change, right? This idea, you think about regular people being on the same playing field as elites, right? The elites have amassed things and consolidated power and taken authority and all these things to lord over. Well, that's not in the nature and character. That's slavery, right?
Yeah.
We're enslaving people with this rotten system. Debt slavery, consumer slavery, these stories that have been told that you need more. And here's this one that comes and says, nope, it's your choice. And if you do choose this, you have essentially the power back and the authority back to make your own choices. And when I connect crypto to that, it resonates like we talked earlier. It feels like, wow, what a gift we're given. But then I stop and I go, hold on, Steve, remember we've talked about the fact that there's a trajectory to this creation. The architect has an intent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this renewal, I see it in my own life, a renewal. And it's interesting, the cycles of renewal. How do I know that I'm on the right track? Because it seems like everything that he's ever had me experience in my life is relevant to right now. And you go, you can't make that stuff happen yourself. You can't redeem these things yourself. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So here's the big question I've got for you. This is going to get good, isn't it? It seems like it is.
Yeah. To tell you what, the short answer is yes. This thing is getting ready to fly in ways that that 50 years from now we're going to look back and go, whoa, what just happened here? It's going to make the dot-coms and all these other things, pale in comparison. Not from a technological standpoint, but from a character standpoint. When we look at I'm going to pause. Let's go back for the benefit of those listening to this peach concept.
Yep.
Okay, because it's really important to the things that we're talking about. One of the things we're not trying to do here, let me describe it in this way. One of the things we're not trying to do is to bash the church or come into any kind of dispute or debate about, various belief systems. That's not the intention in our discussions. And so those folks that are participating, that's not where we're going. The intention is to introduce ideas and concepts that then take us to the next level, and the entire reason we have been created individually and collectively. So it's bigger than what we can think of. So by example, so here's an example with the peach. The peach is an example of how this thing works. You take a peach, you stick it on the table, it looks beautiful, and it will look beautiful for a period of time. But that peach has a life cycle to it. Okay, it has a beginning and it has an end. And if you want to extend that peach's life cycle, you have to inject all kinds of energy into it to extend that life cycle, and you'll do it for just a fraction of time. So whether it remains, in the refrigerator, that's the picture of injecting power into it.
Yep.
Or you leave it on the table, it's eventually what's in the center of it will eventually come out and become visible. And that's the decay that is inherently in it. So when that peach is on the table, there's a period of time when it looks delicious, looks great. Man, it's attractive. It's what we want to have, but we can never forget that it has decay in it. It has rot in it. And that rottenness has not yet overtaken it. But eventually that rottenness that's in the center of it will become visible. Now, there's a period of time, as you described, where it's a little iffy as to what is taking place because it hasn't broken through. The rot hasn't broken through the membrane, the skin that's surrounding it, but eventually the rot will take over it as well. So the question is, so that's what's happening right now. The systems that we're seeing operating in the world are being overtaken by the character that's operating them. And that character, nature and character, is rotten to the core. And it's now being seen for what it actually is. Now, some people are justifying it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are pointing at other people as being the problem, but it doesn't matter what your view of its reason. When you look at it, you can see that it's rotting right in front of us. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to inject more power into it to extend its life a little bit longer until it can get to the next level. You said on your stream, for example, about BlackRock and about some of the other big players. What are they waiting for? They're not going to inject energy into it until their energy can be used to control, and produce the outcome that is intended. They are going to exercise their authority and the utilization of their power only when it serves their interests and outcome.
Right.
But guess what that is? It's rotten to the core. So it's just a matter of time before all of this begin. The existing authority and power that is present to tap into is itself so decayed that if you just leave it alone, it's going to fall apart. Just let it be. Now, so what does that mean? Now let's go to the crypto thing that you're describing here. It begins with, okay, if you want a new economic order, guess what you got to do? You got to operate in a manner different than the old economic order. And how does the old economic order work? It operates on its own. Everyone within that system is free to do exactly what they want to do without regard to any other consideration other than their own. That's how that system works. Now, we call it the scarcity model. That's the place where the abundance that man in cooperation with creation can produce is contrary to the concept of scarcity. So what does it have to do? It has to build pools of wealth in order to create the illusion of scarcity. Well, isn't that exactly what we see?
Yeah.
What is BlackRock? Okay? It's a pool of wealth. What are all of the, and you can just go around the list. Here is a very simple example of that. And I put it in a slide to you guys to try to give you one of these practical concepts. There is a company, a public company, that has over $200 billion of cash. Now, I want you to think about $200 billion of cash. It could operate under its full expense load without selling a single product, generating a single penny for like 2 or 3 years. That's how much cash it has. If you took 25% of that cash and you distributed it to the wealth producers, each wealth producer would be written a check for $380,000. And the company would still have $150 plus billion of cash. Now, what would those thousands upon thousands of wealth producers do with $380,000? They would have to find ways to put that money to work. Now, some of them will drop off and not work anymore. Some will work even more. Some will then join that company and say, whoa, you guys are not working anymore. You're stupid, man. I not only want to do that this one time, I want that to happen every year. Let's do that. What would begin to happen? Wealth would be distributed in a manner that would then not only benefit each of those individuals, it would then benefit that company. It would benefit all the people who work with that company. Everything would elevate at a level of sophistication and abundance that we have not known.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty simple stuff. Why aren't they doing it? Because the spiritual authorities that have designed this system that's operating, that is contrary to the scarcity model. Okay? And so this new economic order has to say, okay, what is different then? Well, what's different then is you start learning to listen to and live with the architect of not only this new economic order, but the one who designed the entire order. Start learning to do that. So what are we doing on this chat, on this stream? We're saying, folks, ask him.
Yeah.
Talk to him. Learn to listen to him. Learn to live with him day by day, so that virtually everything you do is an expression of your relationship with him that is full of life and abundance. And right now, you're giving this little tool called cryptocurrency. Start there.
Yeah.
And watch what happens.
Somebody said when the tools of production are in the hands of the producers, right? When they're in the hands of the people can become productive.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing about this is, we talk about crypto, but let's talk about technology and the advancement. What we're doing right now, you and I are sitting in different cities, right? When I was a kid using my rotary phone, it was different.
Yeah.
And so the tools of production have changed. Well, now look what we've seen. So let's go back to 2006. YouTube starts, the first video gets put up on YouTube. It sells for $1 billion and YouTube grows and everything. Well, YouTube right now has created, because of the tools of production, a lot of these influencers who make money on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then comes along a guy named Elon Musk. And these tools of production continue to mature. And yesterday, he made his first video because they were basically trying to integrate this system, this live streaming system that they used to have called Periscope. They've got 20% of the staff they used to have, and he literally makes the first live stream from that system. What's interesting about the tools of production, and you think about what's happening, the rotten system, we're also seeing it's not just the tool of cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
because it's actually the tools of community that have enabled community and communication. Is that
Yes.
these tools of production have gotten to this point. Now, guess what's happening? And I think this is interesting about this generation as well, is that here's Elon Musk, whether you like him or not, he's a Gen Xer. He doesn't like authority. And he's the kind of guy who's like, yeah, I couldn't afford to go buy the Soyuz rockets, so I got an ICBM. And we're like, what? Yeah, the ICBMs were 10 million a piece. So I just wanted to strap satellites to that. And that's how he started.
Yeah.
To have this vision, this creative vision to say, I'm going to do these things. Well, what's happening now with Twitter becoming X is that he knows, and I think this is so interesting. He knows that if he's going to be successful in this X application business, he has to give away more incentive to the producers.
Yeah.
And what he's going to do is he's going to steal away all of these producers. You watch. He's going to put incredible pressure on Netflix because he's going to create a scenario in which people can make money by distributing on his platform. 2, he's attracting people like me as a person who's developing content because the share of the value is way beyond what YouTube does. And it's just a picture of these tools and all of these things. Well, where does crypto come from? Well, if we didn't have the ability to communicate about it, and we didn't have the ease and the reduced cost, at least, of being able to share this, it has characteristics, in my opinion, that are more reflective of abundance. They're not, primarily, it's not just like taking my sword and making it a plowshare and tearing up the earth and partnering directly with the Lord with the seed. But in some respects, it's similar.
Very similar, yes.
And this idea of giving away or quote unquote democratizing the tools of production, what I like about it is that, we see this kind of communist idea of redistribution of wealth, and that doesn't feel right either. And what is so interesting about cryptocurrency in this time is only through communicating in this, Metcalfe's law, which is, this the community's growth and its value being the square of its users, and this idea that it's growing in relationship to this line, that empowering people to make their own choices and to be producers. And you said that, I think, very carefully, wealth producers.
Yeah.
It reminds me back with the talents. It's like, okay, you're going to have the tools and the resources necessary. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to rule and reign in the nature and character of the one who created it all? Or are you going to go your own way and create more systems that are, hoarding and lording? Hoarding and lording. That's what's happened. And it's almost like I feel like Jesus is saying, I'm giving you these tools. You have to make the choices. And that's where the authority is. It's this idea of, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to choose to rule and reign in my nature and character? Or are you going to go your own way?
Yeah.
And it seems like going my own way is, well, I'm going to accept the wages of the one who is lying, the wages of sin. It equals death.
Yeah.
Or am I going to have life and have it abundantly in you? I think it's so amazing because it's so practical, because you start recognizing the very framework of creation, and it's like you align with it.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen if we aligned with it? Well, it starts with listen to the guy who made it. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, it is, and I mean, we do it everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't sow seed on concrete,
right?
We align with the way it's designed. We sow it in the place it needs, where the climate accommodates it, the soil, the seasons of the year. I mean, we do it virtually everywhere else. It's just that we don't do it with the guy who designed it.
Yeah.
So can imagine what would happen if we actually did it in concert with his design. But for every person, it's the same. It's the same thing. Which, by the way, What we are talking about right now, this is we're this is the one thing that and I'm gonna call out his name, the Prince of Darkness cannot tolerate. See, the spiritual forces that we deal with. I think last week we were talking about that, we're physical and spiritual beings, and yet we're almost entirely ignorant about the spiritual world that we are every bit a part of, but know almost nothing about. Well, our ignorance does not change the reality of of how that spiritual dimension works in it. And there are certain spiritual forces that cannot tolerate the idea that we would actually start talking with Jesus and listening to him and saying, hey, I want to learn how you do things. I want to learn to work the way that you work. I want to learn to be a partner with you. You called me friend. I want to learn how to be your friend and to be a friend to you. I want to learn how to do that. That is totally intolerable, because what happens is we then start coming into the authority that we actually possess. Okay, here's a picture of it that Paul was talking about, the Apostle Paul was talking about to the Corinthians, not the Corinthians, the Galatians. And he made this statement. He says, while the heir is a child, it does not differ at all from a slave, even though he is owner of everything. Now think about that for a minute. While the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, even though he is owner of everything. Okay, let's pause. Let's consider that a second. Okay, if you were one of the strategists in Satan's realm, what kind of strategy would you come up with? What would your goal be? If that child owned everything, and yet in his childhood did not differ from a slave, what would you do?
Keep him there.
Keep him there. Do you know that there's actually called an infancy strategy that operates in the kingdom of darkness? And it's designed to keep us in that state of infancy. Because we own everything, but we are still treated and have the class as a slave, and they want the authority and the resources that we possess, and they treat us as a slave. They have learned how to get us to turn over our authority to them, because as children in our thinking, we don't even know what's happening.
What amazing, how that manifests itself is when you ask 100 people, who's stronger, angels or man?
That's it.
That is it. 99 out of 100 would be, well, the angels have got to be stronger than we are.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's upside down. This whole thing is called right side up.
Yeah.
And I think what's so amazing is it's so aligned, right? I almost feel like you're the ultimate chiropractor here, Steve. You're helping realign this thing, right? Cracking it up so let me just say this, because it's so amazing. In this beginning, right? This idea that you would be created in his likeness and in his image, right? And that there's a reason and a purpose for that. And the fact that this serpent would be in the garden, right? And that you'd be lied to, and you in a transaction would give away your authority and be kicked out, right? This going our own way. And then, of course, a lot has happened until one who would come, which I think is awesome. It's like my dad saying, kids, you keep acting up, I'm going to have to turn this car around. And I think about it's like, all right, I'm coming into this place, right? I'm going to come on the scene. And what is every story about, so that you know who I am? Well, what's the story of the prodigal son? Knowing who the father is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to model the way for you. I'm not going to be reactive. I'm going to be proactive. It explains everything that Jesus said or didn't say.
Yeah.
He made it very clear, I don't do anything except what the Father says. The Father reiterated so many times, listen to him, and I will be with you till the end of the age. I'm here with you. And the greatest decentralization event that happens, it's like I'm sending one who will remind you of everything I said.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? So you're gonna literally take the man that you are, the word that becomes flesh, you're walking around on sandals, and you're gonna say, I'm gonna go, but I'm gonna literally decentralize myself and literally give you one who would remind you of everything I said.
Yeah.
So the word of God is the spoken word of Jesus in the moment,
Yes.
and we can walk with him and he will guide our steps. And he says, I'll make your path straight. I want my path to be straight.
Yeah. Right
That's what
on.
I want. I want to align myself with the very nature and character of who God is. And I only want to do what he tells me to do, because every time he tells me to do something that's from him, it resonates and blesses and protects. And you go, this is unbelievable, because it's aligned with everything I know to be true, right? It's like, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. There's a peace that transcends all understanding. Wow, what is the result of all of these things? Patience and love and kindness and gentleness and self-control. All of these things blossom out of this. And then I think about this, like, well, what do you have next? And you said this the other day, and will you tell folks about this? Because I love this. You said, yeah, I kind of get up in the morning and I go, hey, what are we doing today? And then at the end of the day, you're like, how'd we do?
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is? Because that's so practical. It's like, don't worry about tomorrow. Hey, so what is that for you? It's like, is that kind of how you operate? Hey, what are we doing today?
Well, it's entirely how I operate. I mean, and it is learning, that is a demonstration of what we talk about, of learning how to live with him moment by moment, to where it's like breathing. See, it is every morning. I wake up, what do we got going? What do you want to talk about this morning? How's the day looking? And then the default and virtually everything is, thank you, Father. How'd we do?
Yeah.
You know, and it's what's so important about that is, for me anyway, Matt, is it makes real what has otherwise been confined to the conceptual.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks would, in hearing these kinds of things, would say, oh, yeah, that just is too good to be true. Well, perhaps that's why we're suggesting try it out. Try it out in your own life. Try it out in your family. Look and see what happens when you start living like this. The changes that it begins to make in the way you view your life, the way you view those who are in your life, the way that you see Jesus do things, like Ray was talking about, he did not have the slightest clue what was going to happen with that alternator.
Yep.
Okay? But Jesus knew exactly what was going on. And at the appropriate time, in the fullness of time, where Chronos time and Kairos time converged to create the fullness of time, that alternator blew, and it blew just at the right time so Ray could hang out, with Rags and his family and have a great time while his car was being restored to its proper order. Now, let me tell you something. That is not something that happens once in a while. You begin to see that kind of stuff happens all the time. And it's not that you're willing or predefining things. It's just that you're hanging with them. Well, no wonder Jesus said, don't be anxious
Yeah.
for tomorrow. No wonder he said the enemy comes to steal through the worries, anxieties, and worries of life that choke out his word. Oh, so that's why it's there. Well, Jesus, can we live it a different way? Let's try that out.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us have kids. And for us who don't have kids, we're probably getting ready to have kids if we're younger. If we're older, we have grandchildren. Well, hey, why don't we do something different? You know, why don't we just try that out for a change? You know, what do we have to lose? You know, when I was in high school, I think I've shared this, with you folks. The three greatest offenses were, chewing gum in school, smoking in the bathroom, and ditching classes. Today, it's kids killing each other, and you know, uh, metal detectors in the entrance of schools, and all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, man, what's happened in those few short years? You're talking about in 5 decades, we've gone from chewing gum to automatic guns. What? Somebody's got to pause and say, hey, listen, something is not right. We're not doing something right here.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we try something different?
Yeah. The
It's
step change, man.
It's step change, and it's not complicated. It's a piece
You
of
know what?
cake once you start learning to do it.
Yeah. You know what I think also is interesting. We talked a lot about his ways are not our ways.
Yeah.
And that, he doesn't measure the way we measure, right? And I think a lot of times in crypto, we think about the bank account or the bag size or, money and, accumulation and what the world views as successful.
Yeah.
I've found really in these last 8 months, one of the most powerful things I've learned by talking to you, Steve, is this idea of not reacting. And I've really examined this in my own life. When I react, it really disrupts a lot of things.
Yeah.
And partly because people are looking to you, right? There's leadership, even though you may not recognize it, that you are broadcasting. And for example, little things, very little things, this idea of breathing,
Yeah.
the little things I see is there are times when I'm like, hey, Jesus, what am I forgetting? Like I was like, what am I forgetting? And it's like, bam, there's something. I'm like, huh. And then, I know, and this was my attitude. Think about my attitude. I'm being transparent here. I'd come home and I kind of treated things for a long time in my life that going home was my second job. Right? That my attitude was, I work all day and I got to come home and work all night.
Yeah.
And of course, when you got little kids, it becomes a lot like that because, there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And really one of the things that's come out of these conversations is going, well, how do I bless and protect? And how do I not react?
Yeah.
Because what's funny is when I react, everyone else overreacts.
Yep. Rippling effect.
Yeah. And it ripples effect and it escalates. And it's really been something. I literally stop in my truck before I get in the house and I go, all right, what do you want to do? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
And that's different. And it's really interesting because I think a lot of men, especially, and this is part of this lie, right? Because things are upside down. The practical is, I think about my wife. My wife is very ordered. She's very disciplined. And she keeps a lot of balls in the air. She's keeping track of schedule. She's keeping track of kids. She wants to protect the family. And there's a lot of details that she handles. And frankly, I'm super thankful because I don't want to handle those. But a lot of times we don't appreciate that.
Yes.
And we don't understand actually what's going on. And the same is true otherwise. A lot of times, in traditional families, wives don't understand what men shoulder. So, but if I've looked at things and I go, you know what? I can probably trace back a lot of the problems I've had to me and my attitude about things and how I approach these things. And so one of the greatest things that I've learned is, all right, if I'm holding each thought captive and I'm saying, hey, Jesus, what are we doing next? I'm not keeping score anymore.
Right on.
And that
Right
was
on.
one of the big things I was doing.
Right
I
on.
was like, well, if I come in and I do the dishes and you should have done them, or I do this thing, it becomes this, point system versus saying, hey, Jesus, what should we do? And what's interesting about that is it's like, no, that the next thing comes to mind. Oh, I should probably do this and do that. And out of appreciation, also to understand that, hey, we're a team
Yes.
is really unique to say, all right, you have a role in this. And I think so many times you talked about identity being stripped. It is amazing to me. We see it manifest in things like what's a woman, what's a man, all these kind of things that are happening. And these are like high profile identity things. But I just look at Disney films and my kids. What is the Disney dad but a dope?
Yep.
He's dopey. And mom's the one that's running everything, and dopey dad, here's dopey dad again. And that's this story of saying, no, we're going to reinforce this upside down world. Well, what does it mean to be a man? Well, a part of this is you're a son of God.
Yeah.
And you can't, and there's something really powerful about this too, that probably one of the greatest things is not reacting. And it's hard to, like, I'm not saying I do it perfectly, but that's what Ray said when he came in this morning. He's like, you know what? We had such a wonderful time coming back, bringing my daughter back from her camp. And he was like, you know what? At times I'd probably get upset about this thing, but I'm not gonna react to this. And what happens is things are peaceful.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're being passive. It's that you're being proactive.
Yes.
And that's where this character of blessing and protecting comes and becomes super practical.
Oh, it's amazingly so. There's a reason why Paul called it, the transforming of the mind is, speaking in my for my own part, went through a time where Jesus literally stripped down everything that I thought was true and then began to refashion my mind and my approach to things that did not resemble anything of what I thought I was supposed to do in the former manner. It really was a transformational process that the whole way that we think, vis-a-vis right side up, upside down, that's by design.
Mm-hmm.
So who benefits from that design? It certainly isn't the kingdom of God, because we've launched that out way in the future someplace. It isn't our families. How do we know that? Because over 50% of all marriages end in divorces. And then we get into the things that we get upset about are just another indication of this atrophied approach to life and the atrophy of our mind's ability to actually function in our world, to where eventually we just roll over and play dead.
Yeah. And
while the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, even though he is owner of everything. Wow. Jesus, I want to understand that one.
And you talk about lookalikes, being able to discern these, true things from things that look similar to it. I look at Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate's big in the news, right? And what is this story of this alpha male? And it's interesting because in that is a lie as well. And that lie is that you manifest your own future. You take the bull by the horns. You get fit. You become attractive. You become successful. You be what the world is saying is a man.
Yeah.
And of course, that's attracting a lot of people too. It's this idea of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be disciplined. But what's really interesting is this idea that if my yoke is easy and my burden is light, hold on, there's a path that is straight. there are some basic things. I know that if I exercise and work out, I lose weight. If I eat less, right? There's some basic fundamentals.
Yeah.
But this is probably the most core fundamental, is that literally you can ask Jesus at any time about any topic of any subject, and
Yeah.
there is a straight path through it all.
Yeah.
And even the endurance through tragedy, and even the endurance through pain. And it's amazing. It transcends understanding. And so let me ask you this: are you okay if I throw you a curveball?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not going to say I'm going to hit it, but go ahead and throw it. You're the pitcher.
So you've mentioned before that when you were young, that you played with some older boys, and tell us about that pitch that older boy sent your way.
Oh, yeah. It's when I was a 10-year-old in Little League. And in those days, the 10, 11, and 12 was the Little League um, age range. And so 10-year-olds were not allowed to play in the regular games. They had their own games on Friday nights. But in the last game of the year, then 10-year-olds were able to play. And so I was put in the lineup and able to hit. And this 12-year-old, who was one of the better pitchers in the league, um, you know, when I went up to hit, he threw the ball faster than anybody I'd ever seen throw it. So it was like a BB. But then he threw a curveball, and when I saw that curveball, it was like I started to swing, held up, and then I swing, like a two-part swing, because I was so fooled by it. And as I walked to the dugout, I just looked at some lady in the stands and said, "Wow, I've never seen anything like that. How can anybody hit that?" And you know, the whole moral of the story was the thing that got me out, that astounded me at its level of sophistication and difficulty, is the very thing that God used to enable me not only hit that 12-year-old curveball, but eventually hit the best curveballs that could be thrown anywhere in the world. So I don't know if that's where you were going, but
It is, and I just love baseball stories.
yeah.
But for those of you who don't know, so Steve, you played with the Toronto Blue Jays and the Oakland A's. Is that right?
Yeah, I came up through the Royals organization and then was drafted off the Royals roster to play in Toronto's maiden season in 1977, and then traded to Oakland in '78. Yeah.
Okay. What
Yeah.
did you, when you look back at those 2 years and two seasons, did you like one over the other? Were they very similar? Do you see them as one?
Um, boy, that I loved playing, but the game was in its own step change,
Okay.
and um, it really was part of the Lord's letting me see how things really are versus how they appeared to be and what I thought they were. And of course, I would have put that language to it at that time, but in looking back, that's what happened. But both Toronto in those days, um, their front office was hell bent on restoring the old order of management that treated players like chattel. And so there was this constant tug of war. And of course, they couldn't, I'm probably speaking in riddles now to those who aren't familiar with that time frame, but it was when baseball was just coming into the free agency world that we see today. So it was in the early stages. And so a lot of front office management people thought it was what they were going to do is they were going to be the white knights for Major League Baseball by reinforcing the old management model. And so they couldn't do that with veteran players. They took it out on the younger players.
Yeah.
And so the experience was not good at all at a human level. And the same thing the next year with Oakland, which was, I think it was Charlie Finley's last year, who was, a piece of work. And so at the time, I didn't understand it. But in getting a few years removed, I could look back and then start connecting the dots. You talk about this straight path.
Yeah.
Okay. I could then see the straight line from the time me saying, okay, Lord, yep, I'd love to work with you to do these things. I'm in, here I am. I'm willing to go. And then seeing that those succeeding steps were all part of transitioning me out of my former life into my new life. At the time, I didn't see it or recognize it. I was just really disappointed and quite frankly hurt and um, at how that all unfolded. So that's probably not what you're asking about, but that's
No, I love it. I love it. Well, and it's a out of Egypt story once again. So here's my curveball.
And I might say this. It also is a picture of what we were describing just a few minutes ago. That those management teams that tried to operate in the new model under the rules of the old model,
Yep.
They were not successful. They destroyed teams. They didn't build successful teams. They were given opportunities, but because they couldn't make the step change, they were eventually, ushered out, if you will, because they couldn't make that change. So goes
We'll
back
tie
to
that back in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here so this is a curveball, a heck of one, but it's good stuff. So we're coming into an interesting era of time, right? I've talked about this. I've had interests in so many different things, from gold mining to physics to aliens, to just been interested in so many different things, just curious by nature. And so you probably seen this in the news recently, that there are whistleblowers who have come forward. And there was a congressional hearing, I think last week or the week before, where 3 whistleblowers, one primary, David Grush, but then 2 other F-16 fighter pilots who have engaged with these things that we would call UAPs in the vernacular today.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about this as it relates to, we've talked about the spiritual realm. We've talked about, and made it pretty clear that, hold on a second, there's more going on here than we can see.
Yeah.
And of course, this idea of what are we talking about? Like Jesus himself, like sandals and all, doesn't walk into my room in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to let people know, I don't see a physical Jesus walk in and plop himself down and we have a chat.
Yeah.
But all my life, I was in 7th grade and I read the book The Monuments of Mars by Richard Hoagland. And that was at the time when, and my dad and I were super interested in this stuff, and, Coast to Coast AM, and listening to all these crazy things that were going on, and Roswell incident, and you're just into this stuff, right? Well, here we are. I've been the crazy guy that's been talking about this for a long time. And here we have the US government acknowledging, and whistleblowers coming out saying that as far back as 1933, Mussolini, and the first recovered craft that they consider to be non-human origin craft, and now over 12 that they're saying are in the possession of the US government. And there's all of this, talk on both sides of a psyop of something, to distract. But also, there's been some testimony, real interesting, that high levels of the Pentagon have said, listen, stop messing with this. These are demons. And there's a whole group of people within the government who actually believe that this is the demonic forces. Okay. And then there's the scientific people who, some of them just like, well, they've evolved like we've evolved and they're equivalents. A lot of people's fear is that, there's this ontological shock that happens when you kind of go, well, I thought everything was kind of like this. And hold on a second, we're seeing things. Well, when I read the Old Testament, I've often said to Ray many times, I'm like, you know, I- is he the same as he was back then? And what I see here in our own vernacular is, yeah, this has been with us all this time, and we're processing it through this lens of, scientific, knowledge. How do you couch this that we're coming into an age we will see probably in the next 5 years, probably very specific things to discover and uncover intelligent beings, and I won't put a category on them, that potentially have been here all along. How do you process that in the context of this worldview and this walking along with Jesus?
Yeah. 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 Fun question.
Curveball.
Okay. Let me give you a little bit of a picture for those who've read uh, some of my writings. You'll recognize this, but it is a good starting point for the question. Jesus is praying. We talked about that in one of our early episodes. So he's in this time of exchanging wishes with his father. And the result of that is that he is, it says, and Jesus being changed and completing his time, then comes out of his time of prayer, out of the temple. And the disciples come up to him and build this case, trying to convince him that the temple complex was a suitable place for God to dwell eternally. And they were making this case. And so I don't know what the temple complex looked like, but it must have been pretty nice for them to try to build this case with Jesus that the entire complex was suitable for God to live in. And then Jesus asks them this question, and he says, do you not see with your physical eyes in order to see into the spiritual realm what is occurring there so that you can take the needed action? Now, what I just described is not in any of the translations. It is Jesus's response when looking at the definitions of the words that he's used to respond with. And so when you take the definitions of those words, that's what he's saying. He's saying, look, you're seeing something in the physical, but are you not also seeing what is happening behind those physical things that you're looking at into the spiritual realm so that you can actually see what's happening, so that, here's the outcome, you can take the needed action. Now, as just wrapping that up a little bit, they thought it was a suitable place for God to dwell forever and to live in forever. And Jesus said, hey, listen, no, I see something entirely different. There is not one stone that's going to be left on top of another. This thing is going to disintegrate. So you see the difference in how Jesus viewed the very same thing. Now, in our religious world, we then hold Jesus out as being uniquely capable of doing that. But that isn't so. That's how we've been designed to work, because we are the only part of God's creation that lives in the physical and the spiritual both at the same time. No other being does that. Animals don't do that. Angels don't do that. We're the only ones who do that. Okay? And so the reason I start there is because when we see things physically, we have been blinded to that part of our attributes that are also able to see through the physical, to see what's happening behind it, to really see what's happening there, so we can take the needed action. Now, the implication is without that, we can't take the needed action. Thus, the difference between Jesus and his disciples. They would have operated on the basis and made decisions based on their perception, their perspective, that the temple complex was a forever suitable place for God. And Jesus was operating on the basis and thus making the decisions. No, this thing is ready to collapse under its own weight. Thus, he moved to the temple of the human, while they were still stuck in the temple built with rocks.
Mm-hmm.
See that difference?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, that's old order to new order again.
Yep.
An example. So, what is happening in the spiritual world, which, by the way, begins to happen to you? Jesus begins to teach you how to do this. And it's not just teaching you how, it's unlocking the attributes that he built in us already to function. Okay. So, what's happening in the spiritual world that is interesting now? Well, what we know is that spiritual beings appeared on the planet and were described as, and I saw one as if being a man. I saw one looking as a man. And so we know that what happens is that these spiritual beings, these angels, have physical form. Now, when I say physical form, I don't mean physical in this dimension. I'm meaning possessing some kind of substantive construction. They're just not like the air. Okay, so we also see that Jesus is described when he's resurrected, an ability to enter into a room that would otherwise seem impossible because he didn't come through the door. And when he did, he said to them, listen, touch and feel that I am flesh and bone. Interesting, he didn't say what we normally say, which is flesh and blood. See that I am flesh and bone. For spirits do not possess flesh and bone. So, okay, Jesus, why didn't you include blood in there? Is there something about the blood element in the material realm that is not present in the heavenly realm? Is that even important? Mm-hmm. So we see Jesus in the resurrected body having physical structure, meaning there is substance to it. The next thing is that, okay, what are the spiritual beings attempting to do? What is Satan's kingdom trying to do right now? And again, you can read this in some of the writings. Well, the entire objective within Satan's realm is to gain total control of the earth and along with it, all of God's man. That's what he is attempting to do. But he can't do that on his own. He has to have man's cooperation, and not only man's cooperation, but he has to secure man's authority to function in the earthly realm. And so what's fascinating that you see is in this whole thing is that he has 12 rulers in his kingdom that possess the capacity to exercise sufficient authority to run his government, and 11 of them have failed, and there's only one remaining. What's also fascinating is that one that's remaining, we see that spirit's attributes that angelic beings attributes everywhere in our culture now. And this is the last one who is capable, not capable, who is charged with delivering the earth and all of mankind to Satan to rule as his kingdom. Okay. So now, how are these beings that possess substantive construction, that live in a different dimension, how are they going to travel from that dimension to this dimension? Are there vehicles for that to happen? We see the description of Jesus being raised in the clouds. Okay, when he ascended, to heaven. We see the description of the wheel within a wheel vehicle in Ezekiel. We get certain glimpses that there are vehicles that are used that transition from one dimension to the other dimension. But remember, the angelic class cannot move into the earthly dimension without authority to do that. And that authority derives either from God or from, Jesus or from us. So what do we see happening now in this very interesting time? All of a sudden, we start seeing these revealings, if you will, and they're fairly recent in their timing. But we see all of these revealings. We also see on the church side these things called portals. That the church is all about these. Certain ones in the church are all about these portals. Well, what are those about? They are attempting to secure authority from God's man on the earth to gain entrance into the physical dimension so that they can begin to activate their plan, Satan's plan, to take over the earth and all of mankind under it so he can establish his kingdom in the physical side of God's creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Elohim created the heavens and the earth. They're happy for God to control the heaven side of the creation. Satan wants to control the earthly side of creation so that he can establish his vision. Remember, God had, the Father has a vision for creating. Well, Satan has a vision for why he did what he did. And that is so that he can be a co-sovereign, with God. His realm is in the physical realm. So that's a lot of words to say. What I actually am observing is Satan is pulling together the final stages of his plan, and but what Jesus is doing is causing him to operate out of time, so that what happens is it becomes it is no longer effective in the execution because he's operating out of time. And all these things are bursting on the scenes instead of a gradual thing that's happening. Guess what's going on around him? All of these revealings are happening at the same time that everything else is falling apart at the seams.
Yep.
See? What is that an indication of? That he's operating out of time.
Yeah.
In his mind, he would like this to happen in a very smooth transition where he could be a hero element coming down the pike. And instead, it's going to be thrust onto the scene where everybody's going to be going, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here?
Yeah.
What's going on? And you're actually seeing that in some of these testimonies of whistleblowers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
See? His communication is being measured. See? Well, no. Why is it being measured? What's the strategic importance of it being measured? Okay, if these are demons, as described and from a biblical standpoint, then what does that do? How many of you, the folks watching this stream or other places, are happy about demons showing up? See, I
Yeah.
don't think there are going to be any parades.
No.
No. So what will happen? The conquest will occur by force, not by grant. And so that's part of part of what's happening is operating out of time. He's going to have to resort to force rather than by grant.
You know, it's amazing about, I just look at, accounts in Revelation about one comes out of the sea and one comes out of the land.
Yeah.
There's so many things that may be precursors, may not be, but in the crypto world, there's a thing called WorldCoin, and they have these orbs around the world that you go in, and it takes a picture of your retina. Like they're using your unique retina scan, crazy enough, as authentication. And I've often, for a long time heard about the mark of the beast and people being deceived and these type of things. And what's funny is, I read the science fiction stuff, and I grew up, I was born in the 70s, and kind of everything was kind of okay, right? And to think that we're coming into this era, or we've got AI, we've got technological advancements, everything is rotting and decaying, and then on top of it there's aliens, right? Like that's like this, like take it up to 11. It's such an interesting time that we live in, and it's such a transitional time. And I think what gives me so much hope is it's almost like, and you wrote this in your 60s white paper, kind of what it began at that time. And I think about my parents, and I think about my upbringing, and you know it is so significant, the amount of change that I think we're going to be going through over the next series of years.
Yeah.
And to go back to the very beginning, you said it was, it's spelled out when Jesus taught us to pray, right?
Yeah.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And a lot of what you hear was the kingdom of heaven is near.
Yeah.
And this idea of being integrated. What is this kingdom, and how does it come, and how is it integrated? And it's interesting to think that the battle is not between flesh and blood. It's not between us and each other. This is a really interesting time because the systems and the power structures and everything, you said in the past, the devil's on the run, right? Satan's on the run. What does that mean? And to wrap things up, what does it mean? You talk about this idea that none of this is a surprise to God. This is actually part of the plan. You're getting all worked up about things. No, this is going the way he intended it to go. But what you're seeing is the devil or Satan scrambling. What do you mean by that?
Well, his greatest power is in darkness, to not be seen. That's where his greatest power resides. And so from his standpoint, the preference is to always be hidden while controlling as one hidden. When he starts becoming visible, he's not in his domain.
Yeah.
And so he is being increasingly drawn into light to be seen for what he is. And what that indicates, he knows what that means. See, this is the thing. He knows what this stuff means. And so he is scrambling. He is terrified at the prospect that people on this stream are going to start saying, Jesus, I want to learn to listen to hear your voice. I want to learn to live with you. I want to learn to do exactly what you say to do, and to learn to partner with you. I want to learn how. It terrifies him because he knows what that means. He knows that that those folks that do that, they're going to start coming into the reality of who they are as Elohim. They're going to start recognizing that that Satan and his crew are inferior class of beings, that their job is to minister, not to rule. The only way they rule is when we give them our authority to rule. So he knows that the term in Revelation is that he has been bound in little time For the dragon knows that he has but little time. What's happening is he is now bound in physical time. And he no longer has access to eternity outside of time. He's bound inside time, and it's terrifying him. And so the prospect that others will start saying, "Okay, Jesus, I'm going to take you up on this. I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know when you're going to do it. I don't know the means by doing it, but hey, I want to do it." I mean, think about it like this, Matt. If you were to take a poll of 1 billion people and say, how many of you would like to go to heaven when you die? How many hands are going to go up?
A lot.
Yep. The overwhelming majority of that billion. Well, how does heaven function? You just quoted it. On earth as it is in heaven. Well, how does heaven function? Are there folks up there doing their own thing? Are there folks up there that are operating contrary to the design of how heaven is to function? No, they're doing exactly what Jesus did. He does nothing apart from the Father. There is no daylight between him and the Father, and as a result, there's no daylight between anyone in heaven and the Father. They're absolutely inseparably one.
Wow.
Well, let's try doing that here.
Yeah. On earth as it is in heaven.
And that very thing sends shivers down Satan's spine because he knows what that means. And so he is scrambling like crazy to try to get this thing over the goal line, if you will. But in trying to go over the goal line, he's got to come into a state of visibility. And because his whole system is falling apart, it's rotting at the core, and it's collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. And that's good news.
Yeah.
See? That's not bad news. That's
not
good news.
No. Yeah.
See? That's good news. So that's why he's scrambling, because he knows the clock is ticking, and it's about the day of reckoning is about to come.
Once again, Steve, you have knocked the curveball out of the park. Thank you so much for that. It's so helpful to have the right perspective. And folks, anything that we've ever talked about over these 30 hours, go ask them yourself.
Yeah,
that's
right
the bottom line. Go ask them yourself. Right? That's all we're doing. We're just saying, hey, there is one who knows, and ask him yourself. He is alive and he speaks. Steve, thanks again for this. This is episode 15, and it's always a pleasure. And I always learn so much, and I'm always feel like my life is more full by having these conversations. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
You bet. All right, I'll catch you in a minute.
Okay, have a great weekend.
You too. Folks, there we go. Another 2 hours down, episode 15 with Steve Staggs. I threw him that curveball at the end, and that's the great thing about Steve. Like, nothing's a curveball to him. He's hit them all, right? That's what's so amazing, too, about this idea of being proactive, right? There are no more curveballs, folks, because we are on the right team. And so I'm just so thankful for that reminder. And that's why I do this stuff. Think about all of the things that are in front of us, all the unknowns, all the oh no's, all the people, selling their bags at the bottom. What would it be like if we actually walked in a way that was ordered according to the nature and character of how God has created it all? And that's what I want to do. And what's amazing about that is, what is the benefit? There are incentives built in, just like anywhere else in any kind of good tokenomics. And that's the benefits. Peace that transcends all understanding. We have nothing to fear. Thanks for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. We'll catch you next Friday with Steve Staggs. But in the meantime, go check out Matty Allen and the 48-hour stream, the Pulse conference. And I assume many of you are going to be seeing the highest of stakes this evening in a city near you. They've expanded that out to the international audience as well. So, folks, take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. Take care.